I knew something was wrong 30 minutes before my wedding started. Not cold feet, not normal stress. Wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your stomach before your brain catches up. At first, it was little things. My fiancé wasn't answering texts, then calls. Then his best man suddenly disappeared from the bridal suite hallway after making weird eye contact with me.
If you love these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more.
I kept telling myself it was probably chaos. Weddings are chaotic. People get busy. Phones die. But deep down, I already knew. The venue coordinator approached me carefully while I was getting my makeup finished and asked if I'd heard from him recently. That sentence alone made my chest tighten. Because why would she ask that unless something was happening? I lied and said yes. She clearly knew I was lying. Then my maid of honor walked into the room looking pale. Actually pale. I immediately asked what was wrong. She hesitated too long. Then she whispered, "I think you need to sit down." That's the exact moment my body went cold. I remember staring at her reflection in the mirror while she struggled to find the words. Finally, she said, "He's gone." At first, my brain genuinely didn't understand. Gone where? Outside? The bathroom? Then she added, "Nobody can find him." The room started spinning instantly. Apparently, his groomsmen noticed he vanished almost 20 minutes earlier. Phone off, car gone. No note, nothing. I started laughing, not because it was funny, because my brain refused to process what was happening. I kept saying, "No, he wouldn't do that," over and over, like repetition could make it true. Then his mother burst into the bridal suite, crying hysterically. And the second I saw her face, I knew. Because she looked ashamed. Not surprised, ashamed. She grabbed my hands and kept saying, "I'm so sorry." Not, "We'll find him." Not, "There's a misunderstanding." Sorry. Past tense. That's when the panic fully hit. I shoved past everyone and started searching the venue myself, still wearing half-finished makeup and my wedding robe. Kitchen, parking lot, bathrooms, loading dock. Nothing. Guests had already started arriving. Families, friends, people carrying gifts. And I was running around the venue trying to find the man who was supposed to marry me in less than an hour. Eventually, one of his groomsmen admitted the truth. My fiancé left willingly. Not kidnapped. Not hurt. He left. Apparently, he told his best man he couldn't do it and drove away. Just like that. 10 years together. Gone in a parking lot exit. I don't think humiliation is even a strong enough word for what I felt. Because heartbreak is private. This wasn't private. 200 people were literally sitting outside waiting to watch me get abandoned in real time. Then came the worst moment of my life. The venue coordinator quietly asked, "What would you like us to tell the guests?" I still remember that sentence perfectly because of how surreal it felt. Like somehow I'd become a crisis management problem instead of a human being. Meanwhile, my phone was exploding. Guests texting, family calling, people asking questions nobody could answer. And through all of it, my fiancé never contacted me. Not once. No explanation, no apology, nothing. Then my maid of honor handed me her phone with tears in her eyes. She said, "You need to see this before someone else shows you." It was a photo. A blurry photo someone had already posted online from outside the venue parking lot. My fiancé getting into another woman's car. And the second I recognized who the woman was, I genuinely thought I might pass out. The woman in the car was his ex-fiancée. Not ex-girlfriend, ex-fiancée. The woman he was engaged to before me. the woman he swore he had zero contact with anymore. I remember staring at the blurry photo, unable to breathe correctly, because suddenly, every weird moment over the past few months came rushing back all at once. The secretive texting, the unexplained mood swings, the way he sometimes looked distracted when we talked about the wedding. I had ignored all of it because trusting your partner is supposed to be healthy. Turns out, trust just makes betrayal easier. My maid of honor grabbed my arm because apparently I looked like I was about to collapse. Honestly, I probably was. Then my future mother-in-law started sobbing harder and saying, "I told him not to do this today." That sentence snapped something in my brain immediately. I looked directly at her and asked, "You knew?" The silence told me everything. Not only did she know, she had known before the ceremony. Maybe not for long, but long enough to warn him, long enough to say something, long enough to stop me from standing in a wedding dress while guests arrived to watch my humiliation. Instead, she let it happen. I suddenly realized multiple people probably knew before I did. That realization hurt almost more than him leaving, because public humiliation becomes unbearable when you realize other people were quietly watching it happen in real time. I locked myself in the bridal suite bathroom for almost 20 minutes. I could hear muffled voices outside, guests asking questions, family panicking, my mother crying, someone arguing with venue staff, and all I could think was, how do you survive something this embarrassing? Not heartbreak, embarrassment. Because heartbreak happens privately every day, but being abandoned at the altar feels theatrical, like your pain became entertainment. Then my phone buzzed. For one stupid second, I thought it was him finally explaining. It wasn't. It was my cousin sending me TikToks. Plural. People had already started posting videos from the venue, guests whispering, clips of confused bridesmaids. One video literally had the caption, "Bride got left?" I threw my phone across the bathroom, because somehow my worst moment had become content before I'd even fully processed it myself. Then came the knock at the door. My father, quietly asking me to come out. I didn't want to. I wanted to disappear permanently. But eventually I opened the door. The second my father saw my face, he started crying too. That almost broke me more than anything else, because my dad never cries. Ever. He hugged me and said, "We can leave right now." But I couldn't move. I was still wearing my wedding dress, hair done, makeup perfect, like some horrifying parody of a bride. Then my maid of honor asked the question nobody else wanted to ask. "What do you want to do about the guests?" Apparently, several people were already leaving because rumors were spreading fast. Others were demanding answers. And worst of all, some people still thought there might be a delay instead of a total abandonment. I remember staring at my reflection in the mirror thinking I looked like someone else. Then suddenly, anger hit harder than grief. Because he didn't just leave me, he left me publicly, cruelly, cowardly, and apparently with his ex-fiancée waiting outside like some escape driver. Then, his best man finally admitted another detail. The ex had been contacting him for weeks before the wedding. Weeks. Apparently, she suddenly reappeared, claiming she made a mistake ending their relationship years earlier. And instead of telling me, my fiancé secretly started talking to her again behind my back. I asked the question I dreaded most. Did he leave me for her? Nobody answered immediately. That silence was answer enough. Then his best man quietly handed me an envelope. My fiancé had left a letter. For me. And judging by the look on his best man's face, reading it was about to make everything even worse. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the envelope. Part of me didn't want to read it at all. Because honestly, what explanation could possibly make this acceptable? Still, I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter written in my fiancé's handwriting. 3 pages. 3 pages he apparently had time to write instead of speaking to me like a human being. The first line alone made my stomach turn. I never wanted to hurt you. Cowards always say that right before describing the cruelest thing you've ever experienced. The letter was full of emotional nonsense, trying to make his betrayal sound tragic instead of selfish. He claimed he still loved me, claimed I was the best thing that ever happened to him, claimed he'd been trying to ignore unresolved feelings for his ex for months, but panicked as the wedding got closer. Apparently, reconnecting with her brought back emotions he thought were gone, so instead of talking to me honestly like an adult, he waited until our wedding day to disappear. According to the letter, he realized that morning he couldn't say vows while confused. Confused. I remember reading that word and actually seeing red. Confused people postpone weddings. They don't humiliate someone in front of 200 guests and flee with another woman. Then came the part that made me physically sick. He wrote, "I didn't leave because you weren't enough." As if that somehow helped. As if being abandoned publicly becomes less devastating with carefully chosen wording. But the worst sentence in the entire letter was near the end. I hope someday you can forgive me for following my heart. Following his heart. Like this was some romantic movie instead of emotional destruction. I crumpled the letter so hard it nearly tore. My maid of honor read parts over my shoulder and whispered, "Oh my God." Then she said something that changed the entire direction of the day. "You know you don't have to disappear, right?" I stared at her, confused. She pointed toward the ballroom, toward the guests. Then she said, "He humiliated himself, too." That sentence hit differently, because up until that moment, I only saw myself as the abandoned bride, the victim, the pathetic woman everyone pitied. But suddenly, I realized something important. Every person in that ballroom also now knew exactly what kind of man he was. And weirdly, that made me stand up straighter. Then my mother entered the room holding her phone, looking furious. Apparently, the ex-fiancé had already posted something online. A photo from inside the car. My fiancé sitting beside her. Caption: "Sometimes true love finds its way back." The rage I felt in that moment was unreal. Because not only had they destroyed me, they were romanticizing it publicly in real time. The comments were exploding already. Some people thought it was beautiful. Others were horrified. Meanwhile, I was still standing in my wedding dress, trying not to vomit. Then my mother quietly asked, "What do you want to do now?" And honestly, I don't know what came over me. Maybe shock, maybe rage, maybe pride refusing to let me completely collapse in front of everyone. But suddenly I said, "Open the bar." Everyone stared at me. I repeated it louder. "Open the bar. Serve the food. We already paid for everything." My father blinked in confusion. My maid of honor slowly started smiling. Then I said something I never expected to say on my wedding day. If I'm going to be publicly humiliated anyway, I might as well throw the best breakup party this family has ever seen. And somehow, that's exactly what happened. What started as the worst day of my life transformed into something nobody there would ever forget. But the craziest part? The night still wasn't finished. Because halfway through the reception, I got a phone call from my missing fiancé. And the first thing he said was, "I made a mistake." By the time my fiancé called, the open bar had completely changed the atmosphere. At first, the guests were awkward, uncomfortable, everyone whispering and checking phones. But once people realized the wedding was officially canceled and I wasn't hiding in a bathroom crying anymore, something strange happened. The mood shifted. It became less funeral, more chaotic solidarity. My cousins started dancing. My bridesmaids got aggressively drunk. One of my uncles yelled, "We already drove 3 hours. We're eating the steak." And honestly, that energy saved me. Because every minute I spent surrounded by people furious on my behalf made it harder to spiral into humiliation. The best part was watching guests slowly turn against my ex-fiancé in real time. At first, people were confused. Then, details spread. The ex-fiancé, the social media posts, the fact he planned this enough to leave a letter. By the second hour, the sympathy completely shifted toward me. People weren't laughing at me. They were disgusted by him. That realization helped more than therapy probably ever will. Then my phone rang. His name flashed across the screen. The entire table went silent immediately. I answered without even thinking. The first thing he said was, "I made a mistake." No hello, no apology first, just panic. I walked away from the table while everyone watched me. Then I asked the obvious question. "What happened? Did your soulmate leave already?" Silence. Then he sighed heavily and said, "It's not what you think." Classic. Apparently, after leaving the venue with his ex, reality hit him fast. According to him, the emotional high disappeared almost immediately once they were alone together. They started arguing within an hour. Arguing. On our wedding day. He claimed she expected him to feel relieved and happy after leaving me. Instead, he started panicking about what he'd done. Then came the part that almost made me laugh. Apparently, she got angry because he wouldn't stop talking about me. I had to physically mute the phone for a second because my bridesmaids nearby started screaming with laughter. Then he said, "I think I had some kind of breakdown." A breakdown. Interesting wording for detonating another person's life. He claimed he realized too late that he was romanticizing the past instead of appreciating the life we actually built together. In other words, he blew up our future over nostalgia and ego. Then he said the sentence that truly shocked me. "I want to come back." I actually looked around to make sure I heard correctly. Back where? To the wedding reception he abandoned? To the marriage he destroyed? To me? Apparently, yes. He said he was outside the venue. Outside. I felt my entire body go cold. I walked toward the entrance doors and looked through the glass. And there he was, still wearing his tuxedo, standing in the parking lot like some pathetic movie scene. My maid of honor saw him first and yelled, "Oh, absolutely not." Within seconds, half the bridal party was at the windows looking horrified. Then my ex-fiancé quietly said, "Can we please just talk?" I should have hung up. Instead, I walked outside, partly because I was furious, partly because I wanted him to see what he destroyed. The second he saw me in my wedding dress, he started crying. Actual tears. He kept saying, "I'm sorry. I panicked. I love you. I don't know what happened." Meanwhile, all I could think was, "You had hours to think. You had weeks, months. You didn't panic. You made choices." Then he tried reaching for my hands. I stepped back immediately. And that's when he dropped the real bombshell. Apparently, his ex-fiancée wasn't even planning to stay with him long-term. According to him, she admitted during their argument that part of her only wanted proof she could still have him. I stared at him in disbelief. So he destroyed our entire wedding to become someone else's ego boost. Then he whispered, "Please don't let this be the end of us." And before I could answer, someone behind me spoke, his mother. And the look on her face told me she was about to make everything even worse.
His mother walked out of the venue looking absolutely furious. Not embarrassed, not emotional. Furious. And for one brief, insane second, I thought she was angry at him. I was wrong. The second she reached us, she pointed directly at me and snapped, "What exactly are you trying to prove out here?" I genuinely thought I misheard her. My ex-fiancé looked stunned too. Then she continued, "You've humiliated him enough tonight." I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because the audacity was so extreme, my brain couldn't process it normally. Humiliated him? He abandoned me at the altar, publicly, with another woman waiting outside. And somehow I was the problem? My ex-fiancé immediately started trying to calm her down. "Mom, stop." But she kept going. Apparently, my decision to continue the reception without him was cruel and vindictive. She said guests were mocking him inside. Good. Then she accused my bridesmaids of turning the situation into a spectacle. A spectacle. As if her son hadn't detonated a wedding in real time. That's when I realized something horrifying. This woman genuinely believed her son was the victim. No wonder he behaved the way he did. His entire life, someone had probably cleaned up his emotional disasters and reframed them as misunderstandings instead of consequences. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "He came back, didn't he? That should tell you where his heart really is." I stared at her in disbelief, because apparently in her mind, abandoning me publicly was forgivable as long as he eventually changed his mind quickly enough. Like our relationship was some temporary restaurant reservation he almost canceled. Then my ex-fiancé quietly admitted something that made my stomach drop. He had called his mother before leaving the venue. Before. Meaning, while I was getting my makeup finished and greeting guests, he was outside discussing abandoning me with his mother. And she let him do it. Worse, she helped him rationalize it. I looked directly at her and asked, "You seriously thought this was okay?" She immediately got defensive, claiming she told him not to leave that way. Not, don't leave, just not that way. Incredible. Then she admitted she believed he was emotionally overwhelmed and needed time to think. Time. During our wedding ceremony. At that point, even my ex-fiancé looked uncomfortable hearing her speak. Good. He should. Because for the first time, I think he was seeing clearly how deeply unhealthy their dynamic actually was. Then his mother grabbed my arm suddenly, hard, and said, "If you really love him, you won't throw away 10 years over one mistake." One mistake. That phrase hit me like gasoline on fire, because abandoning someone publicly at the altar isn't one mistake. It's 1,000 selfish decisions stacked together. And suddenly, all the shock inside me transformed into pure clarity. I pulled my arm away and said calmly, "No, he threw away 10 years." The silence afterward was immediate. Then my ex-fiancé started crying again. He said he knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, that he'd spend forever making this up to me, that he was terrified of losing me permanently. And honestly, for the first time all night, I believed him. Not because he loved me enough, because consequences had finally become real. Then his mother made one final desperate attempt. She looked at my wedding dress, started crying herself, and whispered, "You two are supposed to be together." And maybe in another universe, before all this happened, I would have believed that too. But standing there in front of the venue where he abandoned me, watching his mother defend behavior that should have horrified her, I suddenly realized something terrifying. Even if I forgave him, I would never feel safe with him again. Never. Because every anniversary, every difficult moment, every disagreement, I'd remember that he was capable of running away when things became emotionally uncomfortable. And once trust breaks that completely, love alone can't repair it. Then my phone buzzed, a notification from social media. Someone had posted a video from inside the reception. And when I opened it, I realized the internet had already turned my disaster into something viral. The video already had over 200,000 views in less than 3 hours. I stared at my phone in disbelief while standing outside the venue, still wearing my wedding dress. The clip showed my bridesmaids dancing with me in the middle of the reception, while guests cheered and waved drinks in the air. The caption read,
Bride got left at the altar, so she turned the wedding into a breakup party instead. The comments were insane. Some people called me iconic. Others called my ex-fiancé evil. Thousands of strangers were analyzing the situation in real time like it was reality television. And somehow, the worst part? People had already found his social media. And hers. The ex-fiancé's comment section was exploding. So was his. Apparently, internet detectives had connected everything almost immediately after her true love post. Then my maid of honor came bursting outside, laughing hysterically. Actually, hysterically. She grabbed my phone, refreshed the page, and yelled, "Oh my God, people are destroying them!" She wasn't exaggerating. Comments everywhere. Imagine leaving your fiancé, then getting dumped the same day. He embarrassed himself more than her. The bride handled this like a queen. The ex only wanted validation, and now everyone hates them both. My ex-fiancé looked physically sick reading them. Good. For once, public humiliation belonged to him, too. Then his mother started panicking. She immediately blamed me. Me. She claimed I should have stopped guests from posting videos. As if I controlled 200 people during emotional chaos. Then she said something that made even her own son stare at her. "You need to tell people this was mutual." Mutual. I laughed so hard I nearly cried again, because apparently reality itself was now negotiable if it protected her son's image. My ex-fiancé quietly said, "Mom, stop." But she kept going, insisting that his career could be affected, that family friends would judge him unfairly, that people online were being too harsh. Too harsh? He abandoned someone publicly on their wedding day. What level of criticism exactly was appropriate? Then his phone started ringing non-stop. Friends, coworkers, relatives. Apparently, the story was spreading insanely fast. At one point, he checked a message and his entire face changed. I asked what happened. Long silence. Then he admitted his boss had seen the videos. His boss. Honestly, that almost made me smile. Not because I wanted to destroy his career, because consequences were finally becoming unavoidable. No carefully crafted explanation could hide what he'd done. The internet had receipts. Then his mother suddenly turned toward me and said something so outrageous, even my bridesmaids gasped. She suggested we still legally get married quietly later, after emotions settle down. I genuinely thought she had lost her mind. My ex-fiancé looked shocked too, but not shocked enough. Because part of him clearly still hoped this nightmare could somehow be repaired. Then he said softly, "I know I don't deserve another chance, but if there's even a tiny possibility." That sentence hurt more than anger at that point, because a small part of me still loved him. That's the ugly thing nobody talks about after betrayal. Love doesn't disappear instantly just because trust does. And honestly, that made everything harder. Because I wanted to hate him completely. Instead, I just felt devastated. Then my maid of honor leaned toward me and whispered, "If you go back to him after this, he'll know there's no line he can't cross." That hit hard. Very hard. Because she was right. If someone can abandon you publicly and still get forgiven immediately, what lesson do they learn? Then my ex-fiancé's phone buzzed again. He checked the screen and suddenly looked terrified. I asked what happened. He hesitated, then quietly said, "She's coming here." His ex-fiancée, coming to the venue. And judging by the panic on his face, she was not coming to apologize. About 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled into the venue parking lot, and out stepped his ex-fiancée. The woman who helped destroy my wedding. The woman who posted, "True love" captions online while I was crying in a bridal suite bathroom. She looked furious. Not smug anymore. Furious. The second she saw me standing there in my wedding dress beside my ex-fiancé, her entire expression darkened. Then she looked directly at him and snapped, "Are you serious right now?" Apparently, she thought he'd come back to the venue just to handle logistics, not beg for me back. Interesting. My ex-fiancé immediately started trying to calm her down, while his mother looked horrified. And honestly, watching the situation implode in real time almost felt surreal. Because suddenly the fantasy romance they'd blown up my wedding for was collapsing before it even started. Then the ex-fiancé noticed his mother standing beside him and laughed bitterly. "Oh my God, of course she's involved." That caught my attention immediately. Apparently, I wasn't the first woman destroyed by this family dynamic. Not even close. Then she looked directly at me and said, "You should leave. Trust me." I blinked in confusion, because that was not the confrontation I expected. Then she pointed at my ex-fiancé and said, "He does this whenever he's scared." Scared. Interesting word choice. According to her, their original engagement years earlier ended almost the exact same way. Not another woman specifically, but panic, commitment issues, emotional spiraling, running away instead of communicating. She claimed every time life became too real, he self-destructed relationships rather than deal with difficult emotions honestly. And the worst part? His mother always cleaned up the aftermath. Always. Suddenly, so many things clicked into place. The emotional dependency, the inability to handle conflict, the constant need for reassurance, the avoidance. Then his ex-fiancée dropped another bombshell. Apparently, she didn't even contact him first. He reached out to her months ago. My stomach dropped instantly, because that directly contradicted everything he told me earlier. He claimed she suddenly reappeared. In reality, he opened that door himself. His mother immediately started yelling that the ex was lying. The ex started yelling back. And there I stood in the middle of the parking lot watching the world's most dysfunctional family meltdown while still holding my bouquet. Then the ex-fiancée said something that completely changed the atmosphere. She looked directly at me and asked, "Did he ever tell you why our engagement actually ended?" The silence from him was immediate, heavy, terrified. I slowly turned toward him and asked, "What does she mean?" No answer. Then she laughed bitterly and said, "He left me too." I genuinely stopped breathing for a second. Apparently, years earlier, just weeks before their wedding, he spiraled emotionally and disappeared for 2 days after an argument. 2 days. The wedding survived only because she begged him to come back. And according to her, she spent the rest of the relationship terrified he'd run again whenever things became emotionally difficult. That fear eventually destroyed them. Not cheating, not abuse, instability. Then she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "He didn't leave because he loved me more. He left because he panicked and wanted escape." That sentence hit harder than almost anything else that night. Because suddenly this stopped feeling like some tragic love triangle and started looking like a deeply broken man repeating the same destructive cycle. Then his mother screamed, "Stop attacking him!" Attacking him. Incredible. Even now, with undeniable evidence everywhere, her instinct was still protection instead of accountability. My ex-fiancé finally broke down completely at that point, crying, apologizing, admitting he felt trapped by expectations and fear and shame. But honestly, all I could think was, you had years to get therapy instead of detonating women's lives. Then the ex-fiancé turned toward me one final time and quietly said, "If you marry him someday, this won't be the last time he runs." And deep down, I already knew she was right. After the ex-fiancé left, the parking lot fell completely silent.
Nobody knew what to say anymore. Not even his mother. For the first time all night, she looked shaken, because the carefully protected image of her son had just cracked open publicly in front of everyone. And honestly, so had mine. Not the image of the abandoned bride, the image of the relationship itself. Because until that moment, part of me still believed this disaster was caused by unresolved feelings or temporary panic. But hearing the truth about his previous engagement changed everything. This wasn't random. It was a pattern, a cycle, one he never truly dealt with because people around him kept cushioning the consequences, especially his mother. Then my ex-fiancé quietly admitted something else. Apparently, he'd almost called off our engagement once before, about 6 months earlier. I stared at him in disbelief. He quickly added that he changed his mind almost immediately and convinced himself it was just stress. But honestly, that confession destroyed something final inside me. Because it meant while I was planning seating charts and tasting wedding cakes, he was privately questioning whether he even wanted to marry me. And instead of talking to me honestly, he kept moving forward until the pressure exploded. Then he started begging again. Actual begging. Saying he'd go to therapy, couples counseling, anything. Promising this situation woke him up. And maybe part of that was true. But growth after devastation doesn't magically erase devastation. Then he said something that almost made me cry again. I thought I'd feel free after leaving. Long pause, but I just felt sick. That sentence stayed with me, because I think that's the moment he finally realized the fantasy in his head could never survive reality. The dramatic escape, the old love returning, the emotional clarity. None of it happened. Instead, he destroyed multiple lives in one afternoon and immediately regretted it. Then his mother suddenly grabbed his face with both hands and said, "You're overwhelmed. That's all this is." And there it was again. Minimizing, excusing, reducing catastrophic choices into temporary emotional discomfort. I watched my ex-fiancé's expression carefully when she said it, and for the first time, he looked angry at her. Not me. Her. Then he quietly said, "No, Mom. I did this." The silence afterward felt massive, because apparently accountability was such a foreign concept in that family, it shocked everyone when it finally appeared. His mother immediately started crying again, claiming everyone was ganging up on him. I almost laughed. A grown man abandoned someone at the altar, and somehow his mother still saw him as the bullied child in the situation. That dynamic explained everything. Then my father walked outside. He had been inside handling guests and apparently finally came looking for me. The second he saw my face, he understood instantly that nothing was salvageable. He looked directly at my ex-fiancé and said, "You will regret this for the rest of your life." Not yelling, not dramatic, just certainty. And honestly, I believed him. Then my father turned to me and quietly asked, "Are you ready to go home?" Home. That word suddenly sounded incredible. Safe, quiet, real. No more chaos. No more humiliation. No more begging. I looked at my ex-fiancé one last time. Mascara-stained face, wrinkled tuxedo, crying in a parking lot beside the wedding venue where he abandoned me hours earlier. And weirdly, I didn't feel rage anymore, just exhaustion. Then he whispered, "Please don't walk away." But the thing about abandonment is this. Once someone shows they can leave when things become emotionally difficult, part of the relationship dies permanently. And deep down, I think he finally understood that too. So I got into my father's car. And as we drove away from the venue, I honestly believed that was the end of the story. I was wrong. Because 3 days later,
My ex-fiancé showed up at my apartment with something that changed everything again. 3 days after the wedding disaster, I finally turned my phone back on fully. Big mistake. Thousands of notifications exploded instantly. Messages from relatives, old classmates, coworkers, random strangers. Apparently, the wedding videos had spread far beyond TikTok by then. People were reposting clips everywhere. Bride turns abandoned wedding into party. Man leaves fiancé at altar, then comes crawling back. Internet supports abandoned bride. At one point, my cousin sent me a reaction video with over 2 million views, analyzing my facial expressions like it was celebrity gossip. It felt unreal, like my life had become public property overnight. Meanwhile, I still hadn't properly processed the actual breakup itself. That's the strange thing about public humiliation. The attention almost distracts you from your own pain temporarily. Almost. Then came the knock at my apartment door. I already knew it was him somehow. And unfortunately, I was right. My ex-fiancé stood there, holding a thick folder and looking like he hadn't slept in days. I almost didn't let him inside, but curiosity won. The second he sat down, he pushed the folder toward me and said, "I need you to know I wasn't lying about everything." Not exactly the strongest opening line. Inside the folder were printed screenshots, messages, emails, therapy appointment confirmations. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I noticed dates. Old dates. Months before the wedding. Apparently, he really had been struggling emotionally for a long time. According to him, he started having panic attacks after we booked the venue. Then worse ones after invitations went out. He secretly started therapy but quit after only a few sessions because he felt ashamed. Ashamed. That word again. Then came the part that surprised me most. The ex-fiancé wasn't the original problem. She was the trigger. Apparently, reconnecting with her reopened unresolved fears about marriage, failure, commitment, and expectations he'd been suppressing for years. And instead of dealing with it honestly, he spiraled. Then he admitted something that genuinely shocked me. The morning of the wedding, he almost came to the bridal suite multiple times to confess everything. Not leave. Confess. But according to him, every time he imagined telling me he was terrified I'd hate him forever. So instead, he chose the single option guaranteed to make me hate him forever. Incredible logic. Then he looked directly at me and said, "I know this sounds insane now, but I never wanted to lose you." I believed him. And honestly, that almost made it worse. Because if he stopped loving me, at least the pain would make sense. Instead, this was apparently caused by emotional cowardice so severe it detonated both our lives. Then he handed me another document, a receipt, for a wedding venue cancellation fee. He had paid the remaining balance himself after leaving. Apparently, he also refunded several guests for travel expenses anonymously. Not because anyone asked, because guilt was crushing him. Then he said quietly, "I've been going back to therapy." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream that therapy should have happened before the public humiliation. But another part of me could finally see the situation more clearly. This wasn't a man passionately choosing another woman over me. This was a deeply emotionally unstable person self-destructing under pressure and dragging everyone else down with him. That didn't excuse anything, but it changed the shape of the pain. Then he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think there's any chance for us eventually?" Long silence. Because the honest answer? I didn't know. And that terrified me. Because after everything, part of me still loved him enough to hesitate. Then he reached into his jacket pocket slowly and pulled out something small. A velvet ring box. My stomach dropped instantly, because judging by the look on his face, he was about to do something unbelievably reckless. The second I saw the ring box, I felt actual panic. Not emotion. Panic. Because there was no universe where another proposal was a good idea after what happened. Apparently, my ex-fiancé disagreed. He opened the box slowly. Inside was my engagement ring, the same ring he placed on my finger 3 years earlier, the same ring I threw at him in the parking lot outside our wedding venue. He looked at it for a long moment before speaking, then quietly said, "I want to earn the right to give this back to you someday." Not today. Someday. Honestly, that was probably the smartest thing he'd said since the disaster began. Because for the first time, he wasn't demanding immediate forgiveness or pretending love alone could erase consequences. He finally understood trust had to be rebuilt from absolute zero. Still, the sight of that ring made me emotional instantly. Not because I wanted to wear it again, because it represented the version of our future that died. Then he started talking about therapy again. Apparently, after the wedding collapse, he finally told his therapist the full truth about his history. The panic attacks, the fear of disappointing people, the emotional dependence on his mother, the running away. And according to him, the therapist said something that completely wrecked him. "You confuse avoiding discomfort with protecting people." That sentence honestly explained his entire personality. Every terrible decision he made came from trying to escape uncomfortable emotions instead of facing them honestly. Then he admitted something else. Apparently, after his ex-fiancée left the venue parking lot, she blocked him completely. Phone, social media, everything. Not because she wanted revenge, because according to her final message, "You'll destroy every relationship you enter until you learn to stay when things get hard." Harsh, but accurate. Then he looked around my apartment quietly and said, "I can't stop thinking about how close we were to this becoming our home." That hurt. A lot. Because we'd spent years planning our future together. Kids, vacations, furniture, a whole life. And now all those plans felt haunted. Then he started crying again. Not dramatic sobbing this time, just exhausted tears. He admitted he barely recognized himself anymore after what happened. That watching the wedding videos online made him physically sick. That hearing strangers describe him as cruel and selfish forced him to confront parts of himself he spent years avoiding. Then he whispered, "I became the kind of man I always swore I'd never be." And weirdly, that was the first moment I truly pitied him. Not enough to erase what he did, but enough to understand this wasn't a villain. It was a deeply broken person finally facing himself honestly for the first time. Then he asked if he could tell me something his therapist suggested. I said, "Fine." He took a deep breath and said, "If you never forgive me, you'll still be right." That sentence hit me harder than all the begging combined. Because for once, there was no manipulation inside it. No guilt, no pressure, just accountability. Then he placed the ring box carefully on my coffee table and stood up to leave. No dramatic speech, no desperate last attempt, just quiet defeat. And honestly, watching him walk toward the door hurt more than I expected. Because despite everything, part of me still saw the man I planned to spend my life with. Then he paused at the door and turned back toward me one final time. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said quietly. "But if I ever get one, I promise I'll never run again." After he left, I sat staring at that ring box for almost an hour. And for the first time since the wedding, I cried for the relationship itself. Not the humiliation, not the betrayal, the loss. Because loving someone who destroys your trust is a very specific kind of grief. Then my phone buzzed. A message from his mother. And judging by the first sentence, she was about to make everything worse again. The message from his mother started with, "I think you owe my son some compassion." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not because I was surprised anymore, because somehow, this woman continued finding new ways to make the situation worse. She sent paragraph after paragraph defending him, claiming he was emotionally fragile, that the internet backlash had become too severe, that he was barely eating, barely sleeping, and punishing himself enough already. And somehow, according to her, I needed to help fix that. I almost threw my phone across the room. Because apparently, even after her son publicly abandoned me, her instinct was still to emotionally manage his discomfort first. Not mine. Never mine. Then came the sentence that changed everything. She wrote, "You know he gets this from his father." I reread it 3 times. Gets what from his father? Suddenly, dozens of strange family stories clicked into place all at once. The vague references to difficult periods in his parents' marriage, the way his mother constantly monitored his emotional state, the intense fear she had whenever he pulled away emotionally. I immediately called her. The second she answered, I asked, "What exactly happened with his father?" Long silence. Then she started crying. Apparently, my ex-fiancé's father had a history of disappearing during emotional conflict too. Not permanently, but enough to leave damage. According to her, whenever pressure built in the marriage, he'd vanish for days, ignore calls, shut down emotionally, then eventually return acting remorseful while everyone pretended nothing happened. And apparently, his mother spent decades adapting herself around that instability, making excuses, preventing conflict, managing emotions, trying to keep the peace at all costs. Suddenly, everything about their family dynamic made horrifying sense. My ex-fiancé hadn't just randomly become emotionally avoidant. He grew up watching instability normalized, watching women absorb emotional damage quietly while men escaped discomfort. Then his mother admitted something else. Apparently, after the wedding disaster, she finally confronted her son harder than ever before. And according to her, he said something that completely shattered her. He told her, "You taught me love means someone will clean up your messes if you cry enough afterward." I actually stopped breathing for a second, because as brutal as that statement was, it was true. Painfully true. And deep down, I think she knew it too. She started sobbing on the phone, saying she never meant to damage him, that she thought protecting him was love, that after surviving his father's behavior for years, she became obsessed with preventing emotional collapse inside the family, even if it meant avoiding accountability. Then she whispered, "I think I made him weak." That sentence stayed with me, because honestly, she didn't create his choices. He was still responsible for what he did. But she absolutely helped create the environment where emotional avoidance became survival instead of something to fix. Then she said something I never expected to hear from her. "You deserve better than what happened to you." That was the first truly honest thing she'd ever said to me. No excuses, no minimizing, no guilt. Just truth. And somehow that hurt too. Because part of me realized she wasn't evil either, just emotionally damaged in her own way. Then she admitted my ex-fiancé had started intensive therapy twice a week after the wedding. Apparently, he was finally confronting years of unresolved issues he spent most of his life outrunning. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of disappointing people, fear of becoming his father. The irony? By avoiding those fears, he became exactly like him anyway. Then his mother quietly asked, "Do you still love him?" I didn't answer immediately, because unfortunately, yes, that was the problem. Love wasn't gone. Trust was, and those are not the same thing. Then she said one final thing before hanging up. "He's leaving town tomorrow for a while." I froze instantly. Leaving town? Apparently, his therapist suggested getting away from public attention after the viral backlash became overwhelming. So he was temporarily moving across the country to stay with relatives and continue treatment privately. And suddenly, for the first time since the wedding, the possibility of truly losing him forever became real. The morning he left town, it rained. Not dramatic movie rain, just soft gray weather that made everything feel quieter than usual. I didn't plan to see him before he left. Honestly, I told myself it was better that way. Cleaner. But around noon, my phone buzzed with a single message. "I'm at the park near your apartment. I understand if you don't come." I stared at it for almost 20 minutes. Then, against all logic, I went. He was sitting alone on a bench near the pond, still wearing the same baseball cap he'd practically lived in since the wedding disaster went viral. The second he saw me walking toward him, he stood up too quickly, like he wasn't sure I was real. And suddenly everything hurt again. Not because of what happened, because of what almost happened. The life we almost had. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "I didn't think you'd come." I almost laughed, because after everything, part of me still couldn't fully let go either. That was the tragedy of it. Love survived longer than trust. Then he handed me something folded carefully in half. A letter. Not another apology letter. Something different. Inside was a list. A literal list titled, "Things I should have done instead of running away." I stared at it silently. The list included things like, "Tell you I was panicking months earlier," "Stay in therapy," "Postpone the wedding honestly," "Stop hiding things to avoid disappointing people," "Learn how to tolerate conflict," "Stop expecting women to emotionally rescue me," "Grow up." That last one hit hard. A perfect disaster came down to a grown man emotionally collapsing under pressure because he never learned how to face discomfort directly. Then he admitted something else. Apparently, after leaving town, he planned to stay offline completely for several months. No social media, no dating, no trying to win me back. Just therapy and rebuilding himself privately. Not for me, for himself. And weirdly, that mattered. Because for the first time since the wedding, his growth no longer felt performative or desperate. It felt real. Then he looked at me carefully and asked, "Do you think someone like me can actually change?" I answered honestly, "Yes." His eyes filled immediately. Then I added, "But not quickly." That part mattered too. Because healing doesn't erase damage overnight. Growth doesn't magically rebuild trust. And love alone absolutely is not enough. We sat quietly for a while after that, watching the rain ripple across the pond. Then he said something that I think finally gave me closure. "If you never speak to me again after today, thank you for loving me when I didn't know how to love people properly back." I started crying instantly, because despite everything, I knew he meant it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and placed my engagement ring beside me on the bench one final time. Not pushing it toward me, not asking me to wear it, just leaving it there. A choice. Then he stood up slowly, and for the first time since I'd known him, he didn't ask me to stop him from leaving. No begging, no promises, no emotional collapse. Just accountability. Before walking away, he looked back once and quietly said, "I hope someday your wedding dress isn't the first thing you remember about us." Then he left, and this time, I let him go. It's been almost 2 years now. People still occasionally recognize me online from the viral videos. Some even ask if we ever got back together. The truth? I honestly don't know what the future holds. We've spoken a few times since then. Slowly, carefully. No labels, no promises. Just two people trying to understand whether love can survive after trust shatters publicly. Maybe it can. Maybe it can't. But one thing I know for sure is this. The man who left me at the altar and the man who walked away from that park bench were not the same person. And honestly, neither was I.